Just staying on with, I mean, that's a bright spot. You've got to give it to the government. So they've managed to get money. Is the nature of our investments in this country slowly changing? Are we going to be seeing more FDI right now? And how do you, and one criticism we've all faced when we meet international investors is basically.
No, so I don't want to paint a completely gloomy picture. As I said, there are some bright spots, but unfortunately there's also gloom in other areas. No, as you rightly said, I think FDI, certainly the numbers indicate that, I think last year's data indicates we topped China for the first time in terms of FDI flows. So that's a great thing. And just think about it from a policymaker's perspective. They can pretty much see what we can see, which is that you've got corporate India, which has got its balance sheet in a mess. The stress on their balance sheets has resulted in stress on the banks. So if you need somebody to invest, where do you go? What do you do? And therefore, I think very logically and correctly, incrementally, they are continuing to liberalize the FDI norms and particularly reach out to a lot of these companies saying, look, we are trying to make business in India easier. So I think directionally, that's the right way to go. And from the country's point of view, it's actually desirable that we run, in economic terms, a bit of a current account deficit, and we actually fund that by getting capital from overseas. Unfortunately, we've funded it largely from FII flows, which are more affected by, what happens, Brexit, and, with the Fed hike rates or not. FDI flow is far more stable. It builds productive capacity. It clearly creates employment. And so I think that's something we should welcome, and we are moving in the right direction on that front. I think the only other part which needs more acceleration is really this ease of doing business thing. Because somewhere this logic of creating export champions, I think, has perhaps it's beyond its expiry date. And what we instead have to recognize is that in India, you have one of the biggest domestic markets in the world. And when people start producing for this domestic market in scale and size, they automatically become competitive in terms of producing for global markets. And I think one of the best examples of that is what is happening in the auto industry, right? So today you have a Suzuki which says, if I need to make small cars, India is my largest market. And if it already is my largest market, I'm better off developing the cars there for sale to the global markets. Hyundai has done the same thing. Today a Bajaj Auto sells motorbikes across the developing world, based out of India because they have scale in India. So I think we just need to work a little bit more on this ease of doing business to get large capacities in India which service the domestic market, and then they can use the same economies of scale to become competitive globally. I think that's the thought process which has been espoused, but that's the harder part to do because that's implementation. Opening up a sector is instantaneous. Making it easier for people to do business is far more difficult.
Recovery will come only when personal investments, personal consumption increases. But are these companies ready to play that?
I think the normal cycle for a small company is leverage last, and a lot of these guys get access to capital at the end of the entire cycle. So I don't think it's going to be very different this time, and I don't see it being very different this time. So today the smaller entrepreneurs do not want to leverage because the the environment is very uncertain. But they're willing to expand, but expand very, very cautiously, and they're willing to get into areas which are growing. But this is at a very cautious pace. Subject to availability of capital, there are a number of new entrepreneurs that are coming through, but all of them want to fund it by equity. I don't think anyone is going down the debt route because access to debt today for a smaller company is well over 12 and 13%, 2 bad years, and they could be asking for a significant amount of trouble. So if equity is available, they're willing to take it on board and expand. But I don't think they're going to grow with the help of significant amount of leverage.
So what I'm hearing is basically we are in a period of slow growth. There are businesses, the leverage businesses will die a slow death, and then you have companies which will move up the capacity. So let me just move on to the global scenario, just to make India look a little better. So you really had the big event today. Let's get that.
One thing you said, which is about those leverage companies dying, we don't want them to die. We only want the loans to be written down because there is capital which is invested in those enterprises and we actually need to get them into production. But unfortunately, the debt is so much today that without the haircut, you can't make it a going concern. So we don't need them to die, we just need the equity holders and the lenders to both take a haircut, make that enterprise whole again as a going concern, and then it brings production back on stream and the wheels of the economy start moving again. So we don't really want it to go dead in that sense, that's dead capital. So you were asking about Brexit. So yeah, I wish I could sound more knowledgeable about Brexit, but my sense is that, now the events have sort of overtaken any plan Bs that people had. There are two parts to it. One is the financial market impact and second is the real economy impact. I think what we've seen through every crisis, and this goes back to, if you've been as long as me in the financial markets, the tequila crisis in 1994, Asian crisis 1997, LTCM 98, dot-com 2001, global financial crisis 2008, in between there was a commodity meltdown in 2006, is that financial markets transmit pain very rapidly. And that pain transmits instantaneously. And in a country like India, where 24% of your stock market belongs to foreigners, it's bound to flow immediately. And you've seen some signs of that today as well. So I think the financial market pain is something that we'll have to continue to grapple with, because people are moving on from Brexit to saying, does this mean the end of the EU? More importantly, the European Monetary Union and therefore the euro currency. And I think this uncertainty is something that markets are not going to like for a while. As far as the economic implications are concerned, and particularly for India, I have to say that at this time, the only 2 points we need to keep in mind. The EU is our largest trading partner. If the EU breaks up and we have to deal with all of them individually all over again, it's just a far more messy situation. A lot of our companies have gone global over the last 10, 15 years. They've got front-end operations in the EU. They're most probably operating within that as one geography. So it's going to be a very painful process for people to then go back to having to deal with separate geographies. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think as far as the real economy impact is concerned, it's still very early days in terms of figuring out how this plays out. But the financial market pain and the worries that the EU itself might break up, the euro currency area might break up, is something that will trouble the markets, I think, for a while, till they have clarity on the end game. But unfortunately, nobody knows the end game because nobody has ever left the EU before. So exactly what the rules of engagement are, how do you renegotiate trade treaties, all complete unknown at this point of time.
So just extending this same international theme, you have $10 trillion of today in negative interest rates. Monetary policy has played its game in terms of keeping interest rate low. Therefore, as a consequence, asset prices have gone in. And there are commentators who are now saying that is one of the problems which led to populism, Brexit, and so on and so forth. Do you think the role monetary policies played significantly in the world post-2008, even before that in developed markets, is coming to an end? And how does that play out?
Right. So I think you also asked me about, how does India look different compared to the rest of the world? So my answer on this, with apologies to Kenneth, is that the way I see the difference between India and the rest of the world, particularly the developed world, EU and Japan, US, is that it's a little bit like the difference between the top of my head and Kenneth's. India needs a bit of a haircut every now and then, and we'll get growing again. But those challenges are slightly more difficult to resolve. And honestly, that's the problem with the Western world. They have a very serious problem where the onus has fallen entirely on central bankers to figure a way out. And they've tried everything, including going to this negative interest rate. But again, it's a bit like Abhimanyu and the Chakravyuh. They've gone in, but they don't really know the way out. So this is a complete distortion of economics. When I studied maths, or any of you studied economics and finance, you gave somebody 100 rupees and he'd give you back something more at the end of it. This is a perversion where you give 100 and then you get back 99. And I think in older societies, which is what the Western world is, a society which is increasingly going to have demands from the older people for certainty of their pensions, it actually boggles the mind that they have taken the interest rate negative, because how on earth do you plan to meet the pension obligations of those people when you've actually taken the interest rate to a negative territory? So I think they are dealing with a very grave issue which it's not clear how they'll get out. The good news for us is that our platform is reasonably stable. We need the rest of the world to be in good shape so that we can use them as a springboard to leverage to a better growth rate. But even without the rest of the world being conducive, I think our domestic macro is in good enough shape to, keep our growth rates chugging along. You may dispute this 7.6% that's produced by the CSO, but it's still, let's face it, a reasonable growth rate as compared to what there is in the rest of the world. I think we need the rest of the world to ramp up its growth rate so that we can also, soup it up a bit more. But I think I still feel quite happy about the way things are positioned here. And if you were a young person in India today, I think, this is actually the best passport to carry. You're far better off than what the data is showing in the US or Europe, where in fact there's a spike in the number of young people staying with their parents because for the first time in decades, they're not able to go out, get their own jobs and, stay independently. So I think this is a wonderful place to, build your career at this point of time, and wealth creation opportunities, great companies to invest in. So this should be a preferred destination.
The government's intent is to take farm incomes, to double farm incomes at 2022. The question is that whether it will happen or whether it won't happen. There are two things that are coming into play. One is subsidy in that regime is going negative, or it's going to zero. Most of the subsidy is getting transferred to the hands of the end user, which is the farmer. So he becomes more discretionary in nature. And the second part is to eliminate the cyclicality of that business. So how do you eliminate cyclicality of monsoons? Now this is something that we've never even imagined before or thought of before. And I think if you look back into the last year or the last budget and the implementation of the crop protection scheme, I think the insurance premiums for crop protection are down to 2% of the standing crop. Now, with such low premiums, which is subsidized by the government, if they come into implementation over the next 1, 2 or 3 years, and in all probability they will, because they've already called for tenders for the same, you eliminate the cyclicality of that entire business. Now, when all this happens, the question of how much of India does it really impact? India has about 14 or 15% of its total GDP coming from agriculture. Another 20% of services depends upon cash flows from that system. So that's equivalent to about 30% of that market. So at 30% of the market, if you have farm incomes double, and if you have a system which implements all of this into play, I think that's big enough for India to take a longer term leap into taking the base of the pyramid higher. So you bring more people into the system, the availability of credit in that system actually improves. The cost comes down dramatically. The cost comes down dramatically in the sense that today the borrowing cost, even from the public sector companies for the farmers, are close to about 20% because of intermediation. If insurance is implemented in the right spirit and right period of time, I mean, it will come down to single digits. So I think that's the base that will get created. It's a step function. It's not going to happen this year. It may not happen next year. But over a longer term period, I mean, it's a huge business. There's a huge value chain out there, right from labor to farm inputs to an entire ecosystem and how to develop new products in that entire market. So I think that's where it's going to come through. Urban consumption is going to stagnate. Urban per capita will stagnate for some period of time. I think we've seen the best periods in urban per capitas. We just have to readjust our or at least I just need to readjust portfolios going down into how the rural economy essentially works, and find out businesses out there that will grow. And I think you will have a fairly high double-digit growth in that part of the world.
So anything that other than that the government's doing that you find impressive, and what is your take on the monetary policy?
Well, to answer the former part of it, I don't think anything the government's done. I mean, one thing that we did is we didn't bail out any of the insolvent companies. Okay, and we decided to take our haircuts on our banks. We need to clean that system up, and the government's not intervened in that entire process. So I think that's one that's one thing that the government's done, which is done phenomenally well. Because a lot of those businesses, or a lot of the debt in that business is just not recoverable, and the shareholders have taken their haircut. So in most cases, the debt to market cap is in excess of about 30 times or 40 times. So debt to market cap. So that's virtually insolvent. So you're cleaning up that entire system, and I think it's taking an economic, it's finding an economic solution to it all.